Okay, welcome everyone in the room and everyone on Zoom to this week's conversation as a part of the Climate Change, Decolonization, and Global Blackness Lab, a stream of the Entanglements Project at the Franklin Humanities Institute at Duke University. Great to have everyone with us. This week, in lieu of formal talk, we're going to be having a conversation and workshop led by Duke's own Professor Walter Mignolo. Walter is a familiar face in our lab. He's been a participant with us a bit since we started in the fall, and someone whose work we've also been attending to throughout the course. I'll just briefly introduce Walter for everyone on Zoom. Walter Mignolo is William Hayne Wanamaker Distinguished Professor of Romance Studies, as well as Professor of Literature and Cultural Anthropology at Duke University. Mignolo's research and teaching have been devoted in the past 30 years to understanding and unraveling the historical foundation of the modern colonial world system and imaginary since 1500. Mignolo was awarded the Catherine Singer Kovacs Prize for the darker side of the Renaissance, literary territoriality, colonization, and the Franz Fanon Prize by the Caribbean Philosophical Association for the idea of Black identity. His work has been translated into many languages, and he is an honorary research associate for the Center of Indian Studies in South Africa, of Wits University at Johannesburg. Recently, he joined the Dialogue of Civilizations Program Council as a senior advisor. Additionally, he received a Doctor Honoris Causa degree from the National University of Buenos Aires in Argentina, and an honorary degree from the University of London Goldsmith. We're honored to have Walter with us. Thank you for being here. And as we're going along to the folks on Zoom, if there are questions that you'd like brought up in the conversation, please feel free to add them to the webinar chat, and I will address them as we have time. With that, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you for having me again, as people said. Thank you for inviting here. I don't know how they see me. I mean, what is the camera?
The camera is right here. Yeah. Oh, they're kind of over your shoulder.
Okay. So Michael Lynn invited me to give a public lecture in the fall. And I said no. Again, she invited me to give a public lecture in the fall. I said no. Why? Because I don't have anything to say about the topic. I mean, I enrolled in the seminar to learn. And Michael Lee wanted me to make a statement. So I said, what I can do is a workshop. So think together about what are we into this kind of, what is the title? I never remember. Climate change, coloniality, and global blackness. So in my first kind of workshop, I tried to kind of find the connection between the three terms. And I keep on thinking of that. And I keep on thinking, I mean, I don't have any specific to say, but every kind of issue that arises in the horizon, I always ask, how does this fit into coloniality, and how coloniality help us to understand what is going on? And then once we understand what is going on, what do we do? And what do we do in relation to what we are, kind of at the university? We are not the Zapatistas, we are not the women in Rojava that are kind of creating their own system of knowledge. They call genealogy, kind of a science of women, and many organizations around the world that struggle for autodetermination. Not sovereignty, because sovereignty is already kind of taken into the nation state and political theory, but governance and autodetermination. So the question is, how this? Why are we in the situation we are now, talking about climate change and global blackness and decolonization? So before going into that, I would ask you a question, and if there is somebody in the audience that would like to intervene, what do you understand by coloniality after reading Caramuccia and Stiller? They talk about coloniality, beyond coloniality. I find that very interesting because he couldn't talk about post-coloniality. They have to talk beyond the coloniality, beyond coloniality. So that is it's a small thing that alerts us of the distinction between post-colonial and colonial. But the question is, I asked the question because to talk about the colonial, we have to know what do we understand by coloniality. Because if we don't understand, we don't have a clear idea. All of them talk about climate change, and we know the climate change. We know how bad capitalism is. Coloniality is a disaster. Modernity is a bunch of lies. We all know that. And of course, we have to learn more, and we have in the seminar the different ways that a kind of coloniality operates in the sphere of races and climate change. Sometimes the connection is made, sometimes it's not. But we know that. We know about the financial problem. We know about not just climate change. I would say ecology. I think that ecology is a larger concept of which colonial climate change is. And this is a fantastic book, but I have the Caribbean. Malcolm Ferdinand, Decolonial Ecology, Thinking from the Caribbean World. And I will tell you more why I kind of selected the Caribbean. Caribbean is not my specialty or my expertise. Right? So let's go back to the question. What coloniality means to you? How do you understand the concept? After reading Stiller and Caramuccia. You are invited, a few of you, even if you know what I mean by coloniality, you can kind of enter in dialogue between how I use the coloniality and how they use it.
But it's hard for us to define coloniality to the person who like kind of writes coloniality. It's like if you think coloniality and a book like and all that, and you think Walter Mignolo, so it's kind of intimidated. But as a person who I guess is from the Caribbean, has lived under coloniality, I feel like it's in a way for me. I was reading this, and from personal experience, it's the not having power over your own land or your own selfhood because someone else is deciding over all that. Like, how are you supposed to live? How are you supposed to manage things? How the things that you feel are yours by right of being birthed there, of living there, taking care of it, are not really yours because someone else has the power to decide over them. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. Coloniality is like a vacuum cleaner. Suck your, as Fanon said, sucks your soul. It's not a question that is kind of political and economic interpretation. Coloniality sucks your soul and the figure, the memory, the knowledge of the colonized. So that's, but I would just add one thing. It's not just Caribbean people. We are looking at one specific issue, but this is global. Has been global since the century and expanded and now we are today by coloniality, one way or another. Even the people who manage coloniality or manage modernity in the sense we have to save the world, democracy, etc. They are caught in the trap that the Western people, and we say the Western people create. So they have to pay. I mean, rich people put fences on the house. These people have to contain keep the border, not just the border of immigration, but also the border from the north to the south, I mean, the Ural and Russia. So the first, I think you're right what you're saying, but I would say that we are looking at a specific case, and a very particular case, because the place that the African human being that being converted in a slave because they were not born as slaves, they're human beings, and they were converted. So we had to. So the indigenous people and the African people were the first victims of coloniality. Not only that the victim of coloniality, that coloniality became a way of thinking and doing because of the possibility that the European had in the New World. So that's the first point. Coloniality is global and capitalism is global. Right? Any other contribution to what the coloniality means to you?
I think, yeah, in relation to the articles you read today, I found myself particularly drawn to the element in coloniality that Sylvia Wynter would call the colonization of consciousness. That it's both the defeat of memory, of alternative memories outside of the Western cosmology, the Eurocentric cosmology, but it also, and this idea of containment you're bringing up, it's a kind of defeat of the future, in a sense that our ability to imagine alternative futures is already colonized. And I think it comes up to Scheller quotes Trio saying, let's make it thinkable. Thinking the unthinkable would be a kind of decolonial approach to the situation. And I think that has a lot to do with this idea of, that we're stuck politically, socially, interpersonally, only imagining forms of living that are already colonized in a sense.
Right. At the same time that the Viking cleaners suck you and then they give you, this is what you have. This is good to you. So yeah, the one thing I would like to keep on talking is about, especially still, because of food that is now kind of currency. So I have to talk a little bit more about that, because Davos is also interested in food. It's not just the Decolonial, right? And the technology is interested. So everybody kind of thinking about how to control the future, but how to control the present, because what can we do to kind of live it, and that was kind of the decolonial camp. But let me say one more before kind of I give it to you on the work about the decolonial. I said that the decolonial is an option, and people say, no, shouldn't be an option, should be an imperative. And Denise said something very similar. It's the only choice, I think. Yeah. Well, the reason I don't use imperative, because if you use imperative, you universalize what you think is good for you. And if you universalize what is good for you, you enter into a kind of missionary project. And of course, it's the only choice for the people who have the decolonial as an only choice. But the decolonial is not the only way to kind of think about harmonic, cooperative, playing way of living. There are other people who are doing the same, different local histories, different vocabulary, different languages, So the question is kind of entering into dialogue, um, thinking about thinking about the present and the future for people like us and all the people we're talking about who have no I mean, we are not in an institution that can make big decisions. And if by any chance any of us go to an institution to make big decisions with these great ideas, the institution will change us rather than we change the right. So the question, I think, this is the problem of coloniality that we are now. It's very well structured and controlled, but there is more to say in the end. I mean, in a few minutes. Any other would like to kind of say something about what coloniality means to you?
So in just thinking about, I guess I'm kind of combining the definitions. So Michael said that our forms of living, all of our forms of living are already colonized. And so then I just restated it as all of our forms of living are defined in ways where we don't have power over our own self. And so I guess if we understand, if we can define coloniality as that, as not having power over your own self, then we kind of know what we need to address. Like we need to center things, like figure out ways to conceptualize the world that places the power of our selfhood in our own hands. And I was curious if you knew of any other, like what the different vocabulary and ways of defining decoloniality that aren't that, like what those are, like what those.
When I talk about it, people were doing something very similar, but they don't use decolonial. They use liberation, they have a kind of autogobierno, they have a kind of a different way to kind of the basic of intellectual Chinese today are kind of revamping a way of thinking that is thinking young. And that means that they are no longer thinking in binary opposition, which is the logic of Western. Binary opposition is not universal, it's Western, and they grow up because of the culture. So since the coloniality affected the planet since the 16th century, first in the Americas, then in Asia, then in Africa. So everybody is now kind of, even if they don't use coloniality, sometimes they use colonialism, sometimes they use neo-colonialism, and we can talk about the difference. But everybody now is aware that since the 16th century, and that is a kind of a common date, I mean, for the indigenous people, for Afro descendants in all the Americas, not just the Caribbean, and for people of European descent. For European, 1500 was the moment of victory. And for the descendant, it's a moment of victory, but it's also a struggle because they have to kind of deal with the master. So 1500 means, even for Indian people and a lot of Muslim people, they understand what 1500 meant and how in the I think in the winter, I cannot remember the name. See, Kamugisha does a good job in paraphrasing, but kind of interpreting this manuscript by Sylvia Winter that has not been published. But you see there, I mean, Quijano said exactly the same, even if they don't know each other. So the question is to look, for example, in the Rojava paper, they use genealogy. Here we can talk about decolonizing knowledge. Because genealogy is creating the science of women. And that comes from their own language, they call the language. So what we have to avoid is that to think that what the vocabulary we use and the way we describe everything is valid for everybody. That is modern. That is what kind of decolonially we have to teach it. So an option is an option because we live among options. There is no reality.
But I guess we could just, if we could communicate across these cultures and illustrate that we're all like we're all uniting under a similar interest.
Okay. No, that is, I think that goes with something that I used to do before. We understand coloniality, we can understand what to do. But that's it. And that is why I asked what coloniality means to you, because just to talk about, I mean, she writes very well. She's very kind of articulate, and she's very. We must do that. We must do that. We must do that. Yes, of course. But the question is, what does it mean called coloniality? It's not clear. It's just a kind of passport. Right? But Kamashiga, no, he knows. He knows because he's building on a long history of Caribbean, not just suffering, but Caribbean thought. And that is one of the reasons. I mean, one is because of Michael Dean and global blackness and all of that, but also because in the America, the Caribbean have a tremendous genealogy of thought and experience. And we have to pay really attention to that. So Kamashiga, that's a fantastic job. I mean, there are others too, but so let me just now elaborate on coloniality. I don't know if you want to say something about coloniality before I kind of take. Okay, so I will take the ball and run for it. But first, I would say, don't try to define what something is, because nothing is. What it is according to you. That is why I asked what coloniality means to me, not what colonialism is. And my contribution. Yeah. No, well, the first, one of the first things I tell in class is what do you feel coloniality? What coloniality affects you? Because coloniality is not a question of understanding theoretically, by definition or by logic formula or mathematical formula. And you may not feel it. And if you don't feel it, but you begin to see that there are a lot of people who feel it, you have to think about why I'm not feeling it. Why I only feel modernity, but not coloniality. So there are many reasons why you don't feel it. One of them, because we're not aware that this kind of vocabulary existed, because you kind of were born in a kind of a family and society who are part of modernity and the kind of control it, etc., etc. But now, once we began to think about what coloniality means to us, and at the same time, the coloniality is global. So the question is, we have to start working together. It doesn't matter if we are yellow, green, black, white, heterosexual, gay, lesbian, etc., because that is the kind of what Al-Saldoa said, those are the people who feel the border. Not just the border of the geographical way, the border of faith, the border of sexuality, the border of language, and the border of knowledge, and the border of the civilization. So, and once you begin to identify how coloniality affects you, you have to start thinking when you see it or what you perceive it. So sometimes you know, the question, see in the sense of visual, what you perceive in the street, in the family, in the television, in the social media, in the mass media. It's all over. It just needs to be aware. And once you are aware, you begin to understand a lot of things. And now we go into the question of the meaning of coloniality. Right?
But it's not the meaning, or is it the generalizing it? Are we generalizing the meaning, or is it still only
No. Oh, that's a good question. No, that's a good question. Is the meaning according of one specific theory or perspective? And Mignolo doesn't talk about theory. He said that decoloniality is a perspective. So this perspective is different from that of Sylvia and the minister, but they're compatible. And I tell you an anecdote to understand. Sylvia didn't use coloniality before 2003, when she published Unsettling the Coloniality of Power Being Due and etc. Why? Because since the late 90s until 2005 and 6, there was a workshop every year. And it's important to know what example. The anecdotes, right? It's not just a kind of concept of it. There was a yearly workshop in Binghamton where Wallerstein created a Brodel Center and the Work System Theory. And Quijano was teaching one trimester because they had semester. So they were very good friends. They published an article together, but you can see in the article what is Wallerstein and what is Quijano. And you see it because Wallerstein is seeing the world system from the north. And Quijano sees it through the south. So the way experience and emotion shape your thinking is fundamental. So Sylvia was invited in 2002. All were there, many other people. I was there. And after that, Sylvia, Juan Quijano, myself, etc., began to use coloniality. I was familiar with Sylvia much before. So I was really pleased that we were kind of having different vocabulary. We were in the same, kind of walking in the same direction, in different paths, but holding hands. So I tell you now what coloniality, modernity coloniality is, according to Quijano after 1993. I didn't distribute that because I distributed before and I gave a workshop before, but if you want to read 10 pages, is coloniality and modernity rationality that you can find in the web. So that's the kind of the 10 pages that generate everything that is happening now. So then let me tell you the meaning of coloniality, and then we can go into climate change and global blackness, probably global blackness before getting climate change. So in 92, the collapse of the Soviet Union, everybody was talking about modernity. No, modernity was the only thing in happening. People are talking about colonials. But the question now, another question I have, I just keep thinking about it. What is the distinction between colonialism and coloniality according to what you have read? So let's take that question aside. Everybody was talking about modernity. And Quijano introduced the concept of coloniality in 82. It's a Quijano concept. I mean, now it's not his property. He introduced it in a very specific way, and that's what I'm trying to explain it. That article is called Coloniality and Modernity Rationality. So after Quijano, a group was formed precisely in Binghamton, and we began to kind of get together and publish things and have conferences and workshops. So everything I'm saying is not just my individual creation, it comes from 20 years of kind of collective work. And we still kind of do it in a different way in Europe, in the Andes, in the United States. Nelson Maldonado was important here. So it's a project. It's a perspective and it's a project. That's what they are. So when Quijano put coloniality and modernity rationality, after that, we began to understand that it is not modernity, cannot be modernity without coloniality. That modernity is, I said it is a bunch of lies. Modernity is not a bunch of lies, it's the way to legitimize and justify coloniality, right? So they have to say that the 16th century, the African and Indians were lesser human. They were like women and children. So you go together, ages, sexes, and races all together. And that is nothing to do with the color of your skin or the form of your nose or your blood, who knows, I mean, is the capacity and the position, institutional, and the group to control knowledge and classify. So the key term is classification. Classification means not just there are black and there are Indian, there are women. No, it implies a hierarchy. So if you said that there are people who are brown or yellow, black, and are inferior, and if you say that there are child and women, the people didn't talk about LGBT at the time, women. Who is saying that? I mean, who in the sense, what is it? What like? And what kind of person, because it was just one person. Who were the people, the person who control knowledge, control the institution, control languages, because these classifications were not made in Mandarin, were not made in Swahili, were not made in Urdu, were not made in Arab, were not made in Russian. These were made in the 6 European modern colonial languages. Different hierarchies. But the first were kind of Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese, and then
Roman languages.
Yeah?
Roman languages.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let me say, and then
It's like,
and then English, French, and German, which is kind of the after the Enlightenment took over. Before the Enlightenment were so the anecdote I want to say. The book I published in 2000, Local History of Global Design. I was chair of Roman Studies from 96 to, or 95 to 2011. The idea that I saw in the Roman Studies, the global structure. And the kind of and of course we had because the Department of English, that the kind of was the kind of barrier. And then we have the Islamic department. Nobody studied Russia at that time. And so after like, wow, Russia. Now nobody studied China. another department of Mediterranean and Asian studies, blooming. So that's the question of, Roman languages, but also English and German and French, they took over. French kind of lost a little bit of clouds lately, but anyhow, this has to do with coloniality. This is what kind of how coloniality affects you. So you can start thinking about it. So I don't know what it was, but that there is no modernity without coloniality. That changes everything, as I am trying to say.
You're talking about people, what kind of people are controlling languages, knowledge.
Yeah, controlling classifying,
What's the church?
The
Christian,
church.
Catholic, at that time. Then come the Protestant, but then when they fight, they kill each other, but it's still Christianity, Western Christianity, right? Catholic and Protestant, not Eastern Christianity, which is the Orthodox Christianity. And look at the part when everything I'm saying is that I'm thinking decolonially. I'm thinking decolonially through the history of colonial measure of power. Think about this. You begin to see when you start thinking in those terms. Greece is Orthodox Church. How is it kind of Western civilization? Why the United States has such a kind of obsession with Russia? So the question, well, that's it. I mean, the question is not, oh, Putin is a kind of a macho, violento, etc. Well, yeah, Biden is the same. So you cannot get into either or. You have to step, I mean, decolonially, you can do whatever you like, but decolonially, you cannot take side. You have to kind of try to understand what is going on, and then when you understand what's going on, you participate in conversation.
that's black and white. It's like there's
Exactly.
different shades of gray.
Exactly.
And you need to understand all the gray.
And that is binary thinking, either or. And that is zero-sum game, and that is war. So when the Chinese are avoiding war, they are not thinking in zero-sum game. They are thinking in yin-yang, in the kind of, and that is what, when they, all the kind of the rhetoric of China now, the common of humanity, etc. I don't know the other, but they're all, if you know that, you see that in that thinking, not just you feel, but the intellectual. There are also intellectuals that are kind of westernized, but Chinese intellectuals are thinking in terms of India. So then, the question. You have Mandel, you have 3,000 years civilization, you have Confucius, you have Men's, you have Lage. Why do you need Plato and stop? If you're kind of African, well, you don't have big names, so they matter. But you have centuries of oral tradition and way of living. So that is the question. That when you start thinking about modernity, coloniality, that they go together. There is no modernity without coloniality. You begin to understand the first meaning of coloniality. So, but the way we say that is that modernity, what we understand what modernity is not just after the 18th century, but 16th century, because I am not, I mean, Caribbean is French, Dutch, British. And the French and Dutch, British Caribbean, they started in the 19th century in general. Except Sylvia Wynter is an exception, but she was a professor of Spanish. As a professor of Spanish and Renaissance, she understood that there was another story beyond the kind of the slavery would have happened before, right? So, are we okay? Kind of making sense of it? Yeah, okay. So modernity is the rhetoric of salvation. And there are different moments. So the salvation by conversion. That is one. Who were the people? That's when the church, basically, the theologian, control knowledge. And control knowledge in Italian with Latin, mainly in Latin, but with reference to it. And the universities. The universities were created in the Middle Ages, but they become part of colonial expansion. Yeah.
Didn't universities start in, like, the first universities were like,
Colonial,
like Arabic speaking, like they started as. I took a class on, I forget what, cross-cultural religions or something like that. And it was talking about how, like, university, like the term that means university started like at the boss, like it comes from like the word boss. And it's like
the word.
boss, MOSQ, is it either? Something like that.
In what year they locate that? More or less, I mean, don't say it. In what century?
I think like the 14th. I have to look back in my notes. But I can circle back.
Okay. So the question is that every what we call today civilization, which is kind of complex extraction of people living together in what we call urban center. After more or less the 7th century BC, that they call the Axial Age. So there is a German philosopher, Karl Jasper, who kind of launched the Axial Age to say that at that time, 7th century BC, more or less, all over the planet emerged sophisticated ways of living together urban. They are no longer hunter, agriculture, pasture, etc. Well, in America, we have the Maya, the Inca, the Aztec, that were the last one, but the Mayas, they all are 2-3 centuries before Christ. Caral in Peru has been dated 5,000 years, etc. So there were centers, and every center had an institution of education. They were not barbarian. Why they have educated a center of education? Because they have to secure the future of the civilization. They have to bring the child into a certain way of living. So you go all over the world and you will have different terms, different organizations. Calpurni, as the Aztec Yachaywasi in the Inca, but Abautayhuasi is a new university that takes after that. So, but in the West, the structure of education that we call university was created by a way of thinking, and people who think in that way, that they were thinking in universals. And that was the universality of Christian, theological Christianity. So since they believed that everything they believed and said was universal, they created university to kind of control the universal. That is why it's called university. So in order to understand university, you have to go into, and there is a lot of things that you can find in the web and the library, the meaning of universal in the Middle Ages. And then was transformed into the Renaissance University. I don't want to go into detail there, but it's the Renaissance university that, but in the Renaissance there are two periods. I don't know if it's too much what they say, but I try to make the very there are two periods of the Renaissance. 1350, 1500. That's very important because at that period, there was no Europe at that time. It was Western Christian. And they were trying to build themselves up because they were kind of a minority, marginal minority in the global order. China, Persia, India, Egypt. They are tremendous civilization. And then you have a bunch of Christian barbarians, Western Christians who lost Jerusalem in the Crusade and had to remake themselves. So there's a lot of things they were trying to do. One is creating the university, and the other is that Columbus, by chance, kind of landed, and the church saw the opportunity. The church and the monarchy. So who were the guys there? The monarchy and the church and the convent and all the kind of structure, theological structure that control knowledge. But at the same time, in the Renaissance began to appear a group of dissidents that they're called the humanists. And we have the humanities now. The social studies have the humanities. So the question is to try to understand what the things are happening.
I got it, yeah. Okay, so the class was cross-cultural encounters with Professor Mona Hassan. And basically, he was talking about how like during the quote unquote dark ages of like the world, like what the dark ages for Europe was like the intellectual ages, I guess, of like Islamic society.
Oh yeah, oh I see where you go. Yeah.
And so like the place that calls themselves the oldest university in the world was built in 909 AD. It's called Al-Hakim Mosque. And it was dedicated to the education of the people. So like Islamic civilization or Islamic society was about like education, building and things like that. And their word for university is Jamia, which comes from like community.
Yeah. No, but that's thank you for bringing. Those were not universities. They were both Muslim, Arabic, in that case, I think, educational institutions.
Mm-hmm. Actually,
And there are two different cosmologies, but they have something in common. I mean, they kind of the Bible and the Quran. I mean, the Bible and the Quran are two different cosmologies. So if you call that university, you enter into the universality of Western vocabulary.
right. So the difference in language.
In cosmology. It's not just the difference. It's the question of there are two. Why are the Muslims and Christians fighting today? If there is nothing to fight. So that's what I'm saying, that you have to look into the question is not university, the question is education. So how the Muslim, they were Muslim, yeah, but the Muslim educated, what kind of institution they created, and what institution the Christian call it university. And if I am Muslim, and you call the institution of education university, I will be mad. Why not to call, I don't know what the name is, but why not to call the university, Christian university, with a name of Arab or Persian? That is crucial. To the link, we have to pay attention to the trap of the universality question.
I have a question. So we were talking about how universities are based on the universality of religion and the universality or the understanding of the universality of the European Renaissance society. So by expanding into the Americas, was that to expanding then the universality of Europe? and then becoming instead of a minority, a minority.
Exactly that. I tell you a little bit more about it. No, really. The first, and they call it university because they were the Christian. The first university, 1535 or 6. Santo Domingo. The second, 1552, Mexico. The UNAM. 1555, 6, San Marcos. 1575, Córdoba, Argentina. 1636, Harvard.
Where?
Harvard.
So a while.
It's the youngest, right?
Yeah.
But it comes from a different,
Yeah, because like
It
it
comes
would
from
be
the
Catholic.
Protestant.
Yeah.
yeah, they were kind of Catholic.
Yeah.
So I think that the thinking decolonially, meaning understanding what coloniality means and thinking decolonially, allows you on the one hand to understand a lot of things that have been hidden from you in the history, but also to understand the present. And to understand the present, you have to speak the past. I mean, you have to understand the past to speak the present. And there is no future. The future is deep right in the present. The future depends. You cannot decide. You cannot plan. Yeah, you can plan it in Davos. You can say that by, I don't know what, 2040, climate change might be controlled and the poverty will be low. Well, no, human beings are not robots. Yes, maybe. So, so we are in the terrain of modernity coloniality. So how modernity confuse you with the kind of argument that this is reality and this is what we have to do? So the rhetoric of salvation hides the logic of exploitation, of expropriation, of oppression, etc. That is coloniality in relation to modernity. The logic of coloniality, you don't see it because modernity covers it. Now, a lot of people see it, but was very difficult because modernity is not just what people do, it's what people think about what they do and how they justify and control it by the books and by the maps at that time. And now the newspaper by the 19th century, and then the television by 20th century, and then etc. So the means to control the imaginary of the people is knowledge. You don't force people physically to believe in such and such a thing. You have to have a conceptual storytelling to do it. So that's the first meaning of coloniality, the darker side of modernity. And there is always, for example, the question of vocabulary. So in the West, it has been a mantra to say democracy.
Mhm.
What is the democracy and the yeah.
Sorry, excuse me. Well, I also took a class in Greece, and it was about like the creation of democracy was like in Greek, like the philosophy time. And like it has never actually been like for the good of everyone, like even at that time, only like 11% of people could vote. And the whole like the government or people who wanted to become in power would hire like philosophers because they could influence how people thought. So like they would, it's always been about persuasion to like get power for different groups of people or for a person in the political realm.
Yeah.
So,
No, you have to think about the same thing. That Greece has slaves. That's what they did. So it was not a kind of equal society.
Mhm.
But then democracy, one was taken up in the West in the 18th century. The condition was totally different. The people who kind of took democracy were the people who were kind of expanding coloniality all over the world. So what democracy in Europe and then the United States, but the meaning of democracy in the United States was the fight, they have to kind of control the indigenous people and still maintain slavery and still kind of diminish the humanness of the black. And that's one of the things we have today. So the question is, democracy means two things in the modern world. Means that people have the right to vote. One person, one vote. No? That's the mean democracy, which is controlled by the here by the media. And then China is again by authoritarianism. And the second is that democracy was to create conditions to live in harmony. Really? So that's one thing. The kind of democracy is a lie, or it's a kind of cover up. And the second thing, what you have to defend is not democracy. What you have to defend is living together in harmony. And people in different parts of the world have their own way of living in harmony and plenitude without using democracy, voting or so, but democracy, the rhetoric of modernity, hides the logic of coloniality that is kind of destitute or abducted, as Winter would say, abducted, that the people can live together without democracy. And in fact, there was no ideal society. Apparently, democracy ruled a lot of things in Africa and Latin America.
That's what I was gonna say, I was gonna ask. So we could say that some of the issues that we have today, especially in the African context, would be because of the imposition of democracy or the attempt to impose democracy.
No, but I mean, a lot of people have said that in Africa and Asia, the question is, it's not to live like you, but to have a governance like yours. We have our own tradition in kind of governance. In Peru, in the Andes, they have the kind of old governance. In the concept of plurinationality emerged in the Andes and not in Europe. It's because the Andes has been a pluri-constituted organization since the colonial. And if you go to India, you have to Africa, it's even more complex because there are a different kind of ethnic group that we can call nation. So democracy has been an excuse to demonize people because they are authoritarian or whatever, and to impose a form of governance that goes together with capitalism. So how are we doing here? I mean, we kind of deviate.
I think we could talk for another 5-10 minutes and then take a break. And then maybe we come back and we can look at the.
So, yeah, let me finish the meaning of coloniality, and I won't go into the diagram because it takes too long. So it's kind of. So the second meaning of coloniality is the colonial to power. So the Schopenhauer and they talk about the will to power. They saw it in the beginning and the second half of the 18th century. They saw what the bourgeoisie was doing in Europe. So they kind of pick up, and the bourgeoisie is the kind of the ethno class that emerged with the Glorious Revolution in England, the French Revolution, and displaced the monarchy and displaced the church. So there is a big change in the colonial mix of power in the 18th century. So Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, they saw what this kind of bourgeois people were doing, and they described it as with the power. But that's, I would say, that's another thing. Decolonially, we cannot talk anymore in universal terms. That means without modifier. There is no will to power. Schopenhauer and Nietzsche were talking about modern will to power, which is kind of modern, the bourgeoisie in Europe. But together with that, when you get out of Europe and go to the colonies, you can start talking about the colonial will to power. It's not just a kind of the governance of the structure of economy in Europe, but it's also what the colonies meant to Europe. So the colonial will to power goes together with the modern will to power. So that's what you have modernity / coloniality. Right? So when you have a will, be it modern or colonial, you need an instrument. You need a tool. How can I advance this will? It's not that you just go to the workshop and build. No, that kind of things happen in the process. The instrument appears in the process of solving problems. And that is what we call the colonial mix of power. The colonial mix of power is a complex structure. It's not that it's there in the way that the colonial thinking built the colonial mix of power to understand what's going on. It's the same thing that the psychoanalysis invented the unconscious and created the structure of the unconscious to understand what's going on in the narrative of the person. So the colonial mix of power is the tool. And it's very important to understand how the tool works, to understand how it was built, how it was controlled, how it works today, in order where in the colonial mix of power we can do something. Because we cannot intervene in every domain. So after perhaps we can, or if you want to just change the kind of the orientation and talk a little bit more specific about climate change or ecology and race, we can leave the specific aspect of the colonial mix of power aside.
Why don't we take a 10-minute break and then we can come back and see what kind of questions are in the room, and just go from there. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're going to speak here. So I think everything Walter's been introducing and presenting raises a number of broad questions probably in the room, but also if we have kind of ways in which we'll move towards questions of climate change that came up in the readings that we did this week, and also maybe even some Caribbean specific questions perhaps about some of the political proposals that Scheller makes, because they resonate with political proposals I think we've read in other situations, particularly the notion of like climate reparations as a question that could come up. But maybe Ruby has a great question that maybe is a big question, but maybe it'll also direct us toward that area a little bit.
I just had a question about like some aspects of historical framing. So like earlier when we were discussing like the creation of hierarchies, and it was both in this class, but also 2 weeks ago when we were watching a lecture of how Blackness is distinct from like categories, ageism, sexism, etc. And in the previous lecture that we had, I forgot who it was, but it was like how religion becomes the basis for like racialization rather than like the other way around. So I feel like I have trouble grasping with these ideas, like how is Blackness not intertwined or like inherently like present based off of like maybe the works of like Black American scholars or like this like, you know, Christina Shah or like those ideas.
Intertwined, what are the intertwined things?
Like, for example, I feel like, what am I trying to think of? Like, important for this, but it's like the apartment, like the reading that we just recently had. So like understanding like Black femininity and Black reproductive labor, but how it's not just a question of gender, but it's a question of like Black gender, right? It's like white reproductive labor or non-Black reproductive labor in the American context. It's always going to be different because of how we can consider the birth canal as like itself a plantation or a production of a plantation.
Right.
So in that sort of way, how do we understand like gender, ageism, or these categories as
Well, yeah, that's a big question. Can you hear me? Yeah. I mean, I give you the explanation of the but I think your question brings something that is gained relevance lately, and it's what Rita Segato called the mandate of masculinity. There was a crime in Buenos Aires that young people from young guy from Bolivia, he was 18, 19. And there was a group of rugby players. But I mean, the guy, the victim was Paraguay, and he got brown skin. And the rugby, they some have white skin and the other have brown skin. But having white skin in Argentina is like having white skin here with France, right? So everybody said, well, it's a racist crime. And it is, of course. They came Rita Segato and said, this is a crime, this is a gender crime. So how can a gender crime? I mean, the guy was heterosexual, he was with a girlfriend. How can it be a gender crime if there were 7 guys killing 1 guy? She called that the mandate of masculinity. Meaning that the mandate of masculinity is that kind of arrogance of power, of creating, how can you say, bodyhood. Because of the 7, apparently 4 were the kind of, they were committing a crime, kicking, and the other were kind of behind. So the other behind were kind of acting according to the leader. So she called that a question of crime of gender because of the mandate of masculinity. You have to show your masculinity. You have to show your masculinity killing, and if you are not killing, you have to show your masculinity being with the killer, because if you are not. So that were kind of rugby playing. Right? So that kind of is interesting because kind of creates a new dimension of the problem of the intersection of race and gender. Because when you think about that, we were talking before about who were those guys who kind of created the colonial military power, they're all male. And they were white, of course, and they were Christian. So that is one thing that now kind of we're kind of rethinking the colonial mix of power and the kind of, because Quijano brings a lot of races for Quijano was an articulator of the colonial mix of power. So that is classification of the hierarchy. And not just the Indian and the Black, but global, Chinese, the African. So that's kind of classification. So we're kind of rethinking now of the structure of the colonial military power when we bring the mandate of masculinity up front. That's one thing. Now, the other thing I would take your question to connect with climate change and global blackness and global racism. I understand that Michael Lynn by global blackness doesn't mean black and white. She means more kind of global racism, with a special accent on the kind of what happened to the black. But I would say that the black and indigenous, they were kind of the first victims in different ways. So the indigenous didn't have to be exploited, enslaved or transported, but they were exploited here. I think all over the world, but I mean, that's a kind of the foundation. That takes us to the question of the plantation as a model of kind of industrial kind of exploitation, or the end of slavery and the beginning of wage labor. Right? But that is the kind of, I agree with that, but that is half of the story. And that is a story that is told by people in the North. The French and the English were plantation in the Caribbean. There were plantation in Brazil. So one the Spanish have plantation too in Cuba and I think in Puerto Rico. But there were a different structure in the Spanish and the Iberian. There was first was the encomienda. And the encomienda was a kind of you receive the land and you receive the people who were there. Right? So the different kind of labor. And then came el repartimiento. But repartimiento, it was wage labor. So there is, what is important here is that the repartimiento, the plantation, the slavery, the wage labor, and all this is a combination of economic structure. I can go in a kind of detour, but I go back to you. It's a combination of economic structure that affect differently in Spain and England, etc. But in the larger picture, the economic structure are combined to do what? To produce commodity. It was not just sugar and coffee, it was gold and metal. And that's what we call today extractivism in the sense of the kind of digging into the mountain and putting cyanide and all that. Started with ecology. I mean, the obsession of the Spaniards mainly and the Portuguese over Preto with the gold and silver. Even if sugar was more important economically, but gold has a kind of dimension. So all that to increase production. To increase production, what more? What do you do with that kind of excessive amount of production? Well, you have to have market, and that is what the 16th century navigation started. Market. But the important things here that is related to the climate change and race is that economically began to be more important than human life. So human life became disposable or dispensable. And that was from enslaved African and Indians. Now, the dispensability of human life is all the way down to here, right? In the traffic of women, in the traffic of organs, in the exploitation of labor. So that is something that is related to, on the one hand, masculinity, and the other hand, race. Because they could be the fight between white masculine and masculinity. So they were in Europe. They went to war, right? And fought for a long time. So that's one thing. to a new type of economy appears. That type of economy consists in investing the surplus. No economy before 1500 reinvested the surplus because they don't have enough. Right? If there was a surplus, they use it to exchange, or they use it to store in case they need it for a cloud, I mean, sequia, etc. But so that's what we call capitalism. Later on, Marx didn't talk about capitalism. Marx talked about capital. But later, Weber talked about capitalism at the moment in which the Industrial Revolution was already flourishing. So what you have there is that life becomes secondary in relation to gain, to economic gains. An economic gain not just to be rich, is to have the possibility of commanding, of controlling, of management. So some people just were happy to be rich, but I mean, the people who were in kind of institutions like the government or the banks, etc., they were interested in both. I mean, yeah, be rich, but also control. So the question of the obsession, the will of modern power and the will of colonial power began to emerge in the 16th century. It's not that before that there was not will to power. Is that was not this combination of modern wills of power and colonial power, in which you kind of extend. So what does it mean, this stability of human life? That's racist. Because to make human life is possible, you have to consider they are not human, or they are less than human. And that is racist. It's not a question of your nose, your hair, your skin colors. So Russians are white. Iranians, a lot of Iranians are white. Doesn't matter. I mean, who has the power of classifying, has the power of establishing hierarchy. So for whatever reason, so there are Muslims, there are Orthodox, there are post-communists, etc. They want to take control of the war, as if we didn't do that for 500 years. That's another. So that is the question of classification and hierarchy. And the classification and hierarchy basically was racial and sexual, or what we call gender. Because that classification were made by male. European women in Europe and in the colony have a different status in relation to indigenous Black women. Because a white woman from in the colonies could be above a Black person or indigenous person. So that's the kind of the complexity in which the colonial meaning of power began to be built in the interaction of many domains. Government includes education, for example. The government, but the university, the church, economy. And economy includes the bank that were kind of already powerful in Venice, etc. And at that time included the merchants and the adventurers. So governance, economy, knowledge, everything was decided by the conqueror, right? Because the indigenous people, yeah, they have their own their way of organizing themselves and survive. But they have to survive in relation to the position of Spain, Spanish, or Portuguese, or English in India later on. But no conqueror, let's say, have any obligation or need of learning the local language. That was a disadvantage, which turns to be an advantage now in terms of decolonization. Why? Because if you think China, which is 1.6 billion people, and you think that in a radio of in a kind of South Asia and East Asia, in a radio of 2,500 mile diameter, lives more than half of the population. Well, you have to think about that, because these people now are kind of understanding what's going on. So, and that means that 1 billion, 5 billion people in China speak Mandarin, and a lot of them speak English. How many English speakers speak Mandarin? You see, that is the kind of the making of the colonial imperial difference, and that is what is becoming important today, not just for decolonization, but also for de-Westernization. And what it means that the ex-colonized or the colonized people, they know the reason of the colonized and they have the reason of the colonized. While the colonizer only knows the reason of the colonizer because the colonized have no reason. So that is the question of global races that is related to governance, knowledge, economy, and the concept of the human. And that is the point why I introduced Winter. Winter has been doing a tremendous job of showing the human is not the kind of name that name human being. No, human is a social classification, and it's an origin of social classification because it's the model. It's the model of humanity, both in terms of race and in terms of knowledge and in terms of gender. Right? So then you have coloniality, the fabrication of global races, entrenched with coloniality. Right? So on one hand, kind of explain race, global racism through the history of colonial military power, but also is understanding the colonial military power through global races. You have to do both ways. Because if you go one way, you just have a theory and then you have the opposite that you could describe. Now, climate. So that's kind of the global races, right? They have the foundation is not the 18th century, it's the 19th century for us. Climate change or ecological disaster. So there are kind of theory that say that because of the change of agriculture in the world century and displacement of the indigenous population, that kind of began to produce, and that could be. But I don't know, I mean, I am not a scientist to kind of measure how important for that. But I think all of us can have an intuition that the big change came from the industrial revolution. And what was the big change there? Because there was extractivism, but there was not kind of the machinery to extract gold and silver as today that needs tremendous amount of water to wash, especially all the kind of base metals that are needed for using that, right? So that's the question of ecological now for the people who live in the area of extractivism with lake of cyanide, with poisoning of the land, poisoning of the water. I don't know how much this affects climate change, but it's a tremendous ecological change because they affect our life. Now we have to buy water. Water has to be a human right. But you cannot now say no nothing of water confidence. Confidence. So, so if there was significant ecological changes during the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, I think that the dimension of the changes with the Industrial Revolution and the technological revolution of the 1950s, which require all the kind of type of extractivism. Yeah, you can say that the exploitation of sugar and cotton was kind of extracting energy from the earth. But it's not Monsanto, it's not the kind of extractivism with a big machine that you have today to kind of destroy forests and prepare the land to put soil. So it's a question of scale. So the Industrial Revolution, scale change. But also change something very important in our way of thinking. And since the 16th century, nature, which was before a manifestation of action, and knowing nature was to know God, right? So 18th century got the garden God, as Sylvia Winters say, and life, human life already there, and what we call nature became natural resources. Right? Natural resources. But that already has changed with Francis Bacon in the beginning of the 17th century, where he said nature is there to be known and dominated by man. And that is the noble point. That is where Bacon rearticulates the theological structure of knowledge and education into the noble order. And in the noble order of nature becomes. So then you have disposable human life and disposable life of what we call nature. And what we have is still from the 16th century is that nature and human life are disposable. So races and the naturalism, I will call naturalism, but naturalism means something else. But nature has been degraded at the same parallel to the human life. You know, the Constitution of Ecuador and Bolivia, late 10 or 15 years ago, they introduced many chapters of the right of nature. But that didn't come from the people of European descent, it came from the push of the indigenous people. And I don't know if you may remember the anecdote when one of the indigenous persons or a group of indigenous persons goes to the United Nations, because I mean that was a big thing. It's a constitution. So they went to the United Nations to explain that. So I explained that. And apparently that's the anecdote goes that nobody was, I mean, there was some question, but nobody kind of had the courage to ask the important question. So apparently one of the members of the parliament, or whatever the official is, approached one of the representatives of Ecuador and said, could you explain to me how nature can have rights? Because nature doesn't talk. And they said, no, the problem is that you don't know how to listen. So, and that is what we are learning from indigenous people. There is a talk, I mean, there is speak English with nature, with the plant or the animal or the llama. But there is a respect. There is a respect it's a kind of, they are considering living organisms like us. So then if we go, climate change is not that it's kind of hot and polluted. It's that the radical conception of living organism and living biosphere became a natural resource. If we don't change that, we cannot solve that problem with public policy. Respect nature, respect human beings. So that is the decolonial question is going there, right? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking about our readings and this kind of analysis that we've encountered in other readings, analyzing the relationship between climate change and using coloniality to do that, but then kind of coming to these almost kind of reverting to more mainstream political responses like reparations or something that implies something that isn't actually decolonial in a sense, like the political response. And I'm thinking about like our notion of climate, and I want to take us to this one thing that Scheller says that I think is helpful. Like, and I'm thinking about in your work, Walter, how you have talked a lot about the decolonial option and thinking decolonially needs to move away from causal thinking, from causal, like the Western, emphasis on cause, on causes. And a lot of our political responses are bound up with mediating the causes of climate change, which doesn't change the situation. It just changes our mode of interaction. It doesn't actually take an ecological view. It just changes our position in relation to nature or climate. And Scheller has this nice moment in the second text where here it is, where she writes that climate change is not simply about changing atmospheres in the chemical sense, but also suggests conjoined economic, cultural, social, and spiritual atmospheres. We live within climates that are more than physical. Thus, our climate is permeated by coloniality. And there's something about this notion of climate that we're so obsessed with right now that maintains a kind of scientific relationship to nature that is already a colonized relationship. And I'm thinking about how maybe rethinking or thinking climate change decolonially would also relate to what you've been calling not an era of change, but a change of eras.
Yeah.
I don't know, like drawing out if those connections make sense to you or drawing that out a little bit.
No, that's it. I mean, I would say more, but you have something to say.
I was just so in thinking about like the connection between racism and ecological disaster, I guess the change in our conceptualization of nature. Basically it seems like our intrinsic power of like human and planetary dignity has like its worth has been so like economics and like valuing things is what has enabled those two things to become expendable, because now like we put a price on them. And so my question is, do you think that we can live in a world with economic gain and also like how selfhood and thinking about like coloniality, having power, like bringing power back to like the self or like living things, is that possible in like a world with like this economic valuation system, and like how those can be decoupled if possible?
Yeah, that's $1 billion question. $1 billion question. Yeah. Okay, then I will say something there. No, but I think that is, Michael, that's key. I think it's important to do preparation. Or it's important to do everything that we can do within the logic of modernity. That's what we have to change the content of the conversation. But to change the content of the conversation doesn't change your emotionally and it doesn't change your sensorial. So reparation, also restitution of objects from European museum to the African museum. That's very important. But the question is that reparation, let's say, in giving the land back, or giving the gold back, or the silver, or giving the objects back. The problem is when the land was taken for this process, when the gold was kind of transformed, because the indigenous people, I mean, the great civilization have a tremendous respect for gold, but not as a American commodity. It's a kind of was sacred, was for ritual, and also was the rituality of the crowning in the government, but nothing to do with. But the society for gold changed totally the term of the conversation. Changed the term of the conversation of the indigenous people. When the objects were stolen from Africa and Asia and put in the Louvre or the British Museum, it not only took they destroyed the narrative. They destroyed the storytelling that was associated with that object, and that object was built, just not to build an object, but because part of the community. Whatever, ritual, pleasure, whatever, but that never. So when you restitute the object, they have to reconstitute the narrative. So that is why my vocabulary is that we need sociological reconstitution and aesthetic reconstitution, because it's not just the knowledge, but it's also the sensorial, the emotion, the way we. That's why I asked you at the beginning, what do you sense correctly? Don't try to define coloniality in the textbook. That doesn't mean anything. If you don't kind of feel coloniality, and then you start kind of thinking yourself. So yeah, that's it. I think we cannot deny the importance of reparation, of restitution, of reparation and restitution without reconstitution. And I don't remember how Sylvia talked about that, but she's talking about that. And all her work was a tremendous effort to get out of the code, to decode, to not just to decode, but also to build a different code. And that's Maturana. And that's why Maturana is very important for Syria. We didn't get to see it. So yes, that for me is one of the fundamental tasks of the decolonial, what we call option, colonial doing, or the colonial perspective. Now, the other thing we have to do is think about that is important. In doing that, suppose that all of us are kind of decolonial. Now, let's accept that for 10 minutes. We are kind of all decolonial. In what sphere, what we do, in, let's say, start terming the change of the conversation. What can we be effective? In which kind of institutional sphere? Because I mean, when I cannot remember the name of it, Scheller, maybe Scheller. When Scheller kind of end up with kind of the litany of fantastic. It's like in a stadium, kind of getting the fun up. Yeah. Yeah, that's fun. I mean, we can see we are all people. We agree with that we can support each other. And that's important to support each other. But where can we be effective beyond our enthusiasm that we share? That is a crucial question.
All right, I was gonna say, is there a rhetorical question or
Huh?
do you want us to answer?
No, it's just not the answer, but then your reaction, your comments.
So it's like coloniality, it was like, and it is production of knowledge, we can export with the same, like to producing other knowledge.
Say that again.
If if coloniality was and is like production of knowledge, certain type of knowledge, we can answer the same way, producing other kind of knowledge.
Exactly. So who controls the knowledge of the colonial method of power? What we call the enunciation. And the enunciation are institutions, are actors, and modern European language. So there you have to understand how knowledge is controlled to decide how in your condition, because your condition with a different mind, with different yours, when you are kind of living and doing things, what can you do in this context? That's it. And I mean, not just by yourself, you will find another people, that's how you can act, community.
Question. So we're talking about language in the coloniality of how production of knowledge is made in certain European languages. So, for example, authors who write in native languages, especially I've seen this trend a lot in like in African countries, and some in like Mexico and Latin American native languages. That would be an act of decoloniality, right?
I mean, it could or it cannot be. It depends. You have to just not see the act. You have to see the kind of the context. Why are they doing that? Because if you focus on what is being done, and you don't ask why what is being done is being done, so you can get lost. I mean, you cannot see. Second thing, never use is, that is decolonial. According to my understanding of decoloniality, I see that as decoloniality, but it's you who decide, who kind of project. And that is absolutely important today. When you may remember that when in a civilization in which what is narrated is confused with the narration. Meaning that whatever is the narration tells all the truth. Decolonial, we have to separate the narrative with the narration. So who is saying what? When? Why? For what reason? So that's where we go to the enunciation. And we don't get lost into what's being said. We have to concentrate on the saying. And always keep in mind that don't use the verb is. It's not that it's not, because I see that as decolonial, right? I see the La Via Campesina, the Peasant Way, as decolonial, but that doesn't mean that they are decolonial. They have their own logic of thinking, of doing things. So that's another reason why the decolonial. Otherwise, you kind of fall into the universality of what you believe. So the question here, I have been writing, thinking, and talking about that. And that is something, thank you for the question, because it's something I would like to bring into the conversation today, especially with the kind of enthusiasm of the Caribbean that we see in this article. I don't want to play down the Caribbean. I think it's tremendously important. I said at the beginning. It's tremendously important for the suffering. It's tremendously important for the things they are doing. It's tremendously important for the things they are thinking. So I think it's the Caribbean genealogy of thought has a power in a very small area that is equivalent, if not in scale, at least in quality, of thought in Africa or even I would say Europe. The genealogy of European thought is more quantity. The riches of Europe allow the creation of institutions to pay salary in the United States, etc. But the quality of Caribbean thought since the 19th century, it's tremendous, and that's what we see in this article. But the Caribbean is not the world. And I think that the future of the Caribbean depends on the future of the global order. You cannot think of the future of the Caribbean in itself without thinking about what is the global order today, what is happening, and where are we going. And that's your question then. So what I've been thinking for a while now, or 10, 20 years, and you've heard about this, is that since 2010, 2000, yeah, more or less. So the colonial political power was built, controlled, and managed by the Atlantic Western Empire. Portugal, Spain, France, the Dutch, Britain, and the United States. That's NATO. And that is through you. North Atlantic fiction, universal fiction, or something like that. What through you means is that not just the NATO military, the intellectual NATO, science, philosophy, social science, humanities, etc. That is kind of the North Atlantic intellectual or scholarly control. That history ends, and we are the mess we are living today, not just the mess, ecological mess, which is increasing with the kind of the race kind of weapons, because the war is the fabrication of weapons increased, and the competition, because now Europe and United States can no longer have the cake and eat it. There is a lot of people who are kind of having the cake and eat it. So that's a big change. And that's why we have Ukraine, and that's why we have Taiwan. And that's why we have the tension with China. So a lot of people are talking about we are having a new Cold War. Well, I don't see it like that. Why? Because the Cold War was a competition between two Western ideologies. Liberal capitalism and the state communism. Well, state communism was in Russia, but the ideology was. Now we don't have two ideologies. We have capitalism all the way down. So why are we having such problem with China? It's not just there are many reasons. One is economic, because China is kind of getting a lot of natural resources from Africa and from other parts of the world. That's one. Second, and technology, IG and all the kind of competition that appears now. But what is more important is what I like to describe as re-Westernization. And what I mean by re-Westernization, I mean that from 1500 to 2000 was a process of Westernizing the world. So Europe and United States, Europe established colony in the United States, 800 military bases and financial control, Hollywood control, images, etc. So the monster escaped the laboratory. So the West can, the NATO can no longer control what the monster they create. So what we see now in relation to NATO on the one hand and China, Russia, and Iran on the other, it's not that China, Russia, and Iran are trying to destroy the colonialism. No, that is not this. They try to dispute who controls it. Meaning that they are not longer willing to say what the West is saying. And if you have seen the latest kind of declaration by the foreign minister of China, guys, I mean, there is nobody's kind of backing up. I mean, China is already clear that it stop bothering us because we would have a problem. So it's the kind of dispute for the control of colonial material. I go to you. So in the West, you say that Putin is trying to reestablish the Russian Empire and the China want to control the world. Now, everybody was already in the 90s. A noted economic historian, Giovanni Enrique, Italian, friend of Watterson, he was kind of anticipating that China would be the next hegemon. That, for us, is a Western way of thinking. It means that the world really hegemon. What we have to do, we have to be that. Cannot be China. But if you look at it from the perspective of China and Russia, number one, they cannot at this point fight the hegemon because they have to defend themselves against the West. So they are playing defense still. And second, I don't know if China want to be the next hegemon. That is a projection of the West that China wants to do. I don't think that China wants to do that. And even if China wants to do that, I don't think they can. Why? Because NATO will be powerful for a while, even if they don't control the game anymore. So this is now the question. We all in the planet now, we are living in between three major options. One is re-Westernization, that is a project of NATO. To re-Westernize them. So they cannot Westernize a laser like they did for 500 years. It's a problem, etc. But for 500 years, the West was doing whatever they like. They have some kind of problem here and there, people complain, war, etc. But that was easy. It was easy to kill Saddam Hussein. It was easy to kill Gaddafi, but was no longer easy to have a regime change with Al-Assad. Why? Because Russia intervened. Why Russia intervened? Well, because Syria is an ideal place to control West Asia. That from the West is the Middle East, and to control the Central Asia. And now the question is Central Asia. That is where the risks are. So Central Asia is control, I mean, not control, but I mean, you have China, Iran, and Russia, and you have Central Asia. So re-Westernization is trying to maintain the privilege of unipolarity. And de-Westernization is moving into multipolarity. And multipolarity doesn't mean that will be one. Multipolarity will be that will be no center, right? Will be one state or economically founded of the other, but the politics will not just take advantage of the other. And that is the win-win political GP. You can say that this is state rhetoric. Of course, democracy is also state rhetoric. That's right. So We have re-Westernization trying to maintain inequality. We have de-Westernization to end with inequality and open up multipolarity. And all those are state projects. And state projects are related to military and are related to the economy. The third way, coexisting with those two, is decoloniality. Decoloniality in the specific sense we are talking Sylvia Winter or Mignolo or others. But decoloniality in a large sense of the people who are thinking of reorganizing their own life even under this condition. And that's what we call kind of autogobierno, self-government. And in Latin America now there are enormous amounts of organization of peasant and indigenous people that call self-determination, auto-determination. It's not an ideal situation because the state doesn't recognize that and the company doesn't recognize that. And that is the third sphere. So when I ask what can we, our doing can have an influence, is there. It's not in the state at this point. The state will not listen. The administration of the university will not listen to us. But we can do things in the area of knowledge in certain corner of the university outside the university. So what is our weapon is the possibility we have of creating and taking control of the enunciation of the collective power, which means being disobedient to the principle and assumption of knowledge of Western modernity, which are the principle and assumptions that control the coloniality of power, and are moved by the will, the colonial will of power. So that's what we call the linking, or Sylvia Winter name it the other way, but it's a kind of be disobedient. Be disobedient and be also aware that the structure of power is very well structured to be redundant. So in a way, we have to kind of play soccer. Play poker. You have to know when to hold it. And that is the way I see that there is a coexistence, but it's no longer pacific. The coexistence between de-Westernization and re-Westernization is not pacific at all, but it's coexistence. And the coexistence of us, let's say the colonial us, or the people who want to just do something for global justice, etc., climate change, ecology, etc. We can do that a lot of things, but don't expect that the state will pay any attention to this. You have to kind of find, and that's why I say, wherever you are, think about what are the possibilities of doing what would you like to do in relation to decolonization, global justice, harmony, not hate, love, not hate, because now we are living in a kind of promotion of hate. So United States versus even Europe, and not each other. That's interesting. Because it's authoritarian. I don't know.
Are they allowed to?
But for what I know, it's not the vocabulary of hate.
Against like the United States? What is it?
What is it?
If it's not like the positionality of people toward the United States, if it's not like a hate perspective, what perspective is it? Do you know?
What? I don't understand yet the question.
The question, so like the US puts China in like the us versus them, bad, demonizing type thing. So on the other side, if it's not, because if that's not the perspective in China, then what is the perspective?
of China.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, they're constantly dismantling the argument of the United States against China. So that there are two things they are doing. I mean, they are constantly negating and explaining to also to the Chinese people that they do it in Mandarin, but to the rest of the world they do it in English. So they are explaining why the United States is acting like that.
Oh, wow.
Read Global Times. Global Times is an organ that supports the government, like New York and the New York Times and Washington Post support the government more the Democrat, but they are the kind of they are not neutral. The New York Times and the Washington Post, they are not neutral, right? So the Global Times is not neutral. But the question is that from the West in Europe too, they are kind of demonizing. China now has the means to kind of counterattack the demonization and explaining why the United States are doing what they are doing. So that's it. In terms of knowledge and articulation of argument, fascinating, because the Chinese are thinking from their own kind of millenarian memory, history, and Mandarin. And that's what I said before. They can act in the area with Mandarin, and they can kind of extend their knowledge to the world in English. United States or Europe cannot do that yet. They have to operate in one of the modern languages. So they cannot kind of reach the Chinese in Mandarin. But the Chinese will reach a large population of the Chinese, same Russia.
So why aren't people aware of like the Chinese argument? Like, we don't really hear about the counter argument of like, this is.
Oh, well, yeah, but you have to get into the right places. If you go into the cradle.com, if you go into a strategic culture foundation, if you go to fantastic blog in India, but in English, of a former diplomat, Indian punchline, you will find, and you go to Asian Times, which is it's not an it's in Hong Kong. It's a Hong Kong newspaper, and it's very well balanced because they are critique of China, and they are critique of the United States and the European Union. But you can get the different perspective. You can get what the people in Hong Kong and the Southeast Asia. And that is the problem with the West, that they don't read more than the kind of European newspaper and the US newspaper. So you have to do the work. You have to do the kind of research. Because now it's a lot in English in different parts of the world, because that's the way they can reach a global audience that they cannot reach in Swahili or the Mandarin or
Arabic. Which it also comes back to that control of knowledge, like the US maybe doesn't want you to know that, so they don't publicize it, like they don't put it on the news. You have to do your own research in order to like get to that knowledge, because the way that they control the narrative is like, no.
Yeah, and it's I think that what you said. China and Russia, Iran is less what we can find in Iran, but they said there are times that you can get some information, but it's not as sophisticated as some of the Russian. But what I want to say is that, especially the Chinese, they're always summarizing in English position of the Western press. When the Western press summarized the position of China? Never. And that tells you a lot of things. What we think is the truth.
Right.
But when you are in a subaltern position, and China is a subaltern position, you say, oh, well, yeah, it's rich, got a tremendous power, but it's still in a subaltern imperial position. So, in that sense, they are still playing defense. And now we go into the NATO question because there are two positions. From the West, the invader is Putin. He is the guilty party. But from all these places I mentioned, not the guy who provoked the invasion of Korea was NATO. NATO pushing to go east. And if you kind of think about the history of colonial military power, it's a natural movement that Garcilaso de la Vega, which is a cronista of the early 17th century, in the Comentarios Reales de los Incas, said something like this today. Say Garcilaso, the Chancas were attacking the Incas, and the Incas had to defend themselves and conquer the Chancas. The argument of the position of the people in power is to push legally until that's enough. People say, you are violent. So the violence of the right, in this case, the people who control, is legal. I mean, it's illegal ethically, but it's legal apparently. So yes, NATO, why NATO want to go there? I'm sorry. And the alliance, there is an alliance of the United States. I remember the NATO, very vocal and also eating, etc. The kind of indigenous and white and black, etc. And they say, yeah, NATO is not a defensive organization, it's an offensive organization. And they're saying that, yeah, but there's a lot of people who understand that. I mean, just activists, but also economists, politicians. But they don't make the They make it Washington Post. They don't know, they are not in the White House, or if they are, they kind of comment in between them. And what can we do to stop these kind of ideas? So I think that this is our position. I mean, whatever we do as decolonial in general, is to, as Catherine Ward would say, to create cracks in the structure, the content of knowledge. And how you create cracks, as you would say, kind of the leaking from the negotiation, creating different explanation, narrative vocabulary that people may take it or not, but I want to say before, it's not decolonial is an option, because if people began to see the possibility of an option, a decolonial option, and get into it, you don't need to convert it. They will convert it themselves. So you have to be a visionary yourself. The decolonial is the best option we have. That would be inferior. So the question is climate change or ecological disasters, decoloniality, and global global blackness. So I think more or less I say something about that from the history of the colonial Mexico. Not the history of Europe, the history of the United States, the history. I'm not a historian in that sense. But in order to understand what is going on, I mean, what I was saying about today global order, I cannot have been saying it if I have not been working on the history of the colonial Mexico. I mean, what Lacan said about the unconscious, they cannot say it without kind of many years of reading Freud and kind of thinking about the unconscious. So the unconscious is not, so the psychological problem of people in Europe was not very different to the psychological problem of people outside of Europe, but Fanon talked very well about that. So the people in Algeria, the Berber, they don't have trauma like the European bourgeoisie that Freud and Lacan are trying to solve. they have the colonial wound, and the colonial wound is a different kind of trauma, or the trauma is a different kind of modern wound. So how people in modernity are wounded, how the bourgeoisie created a structure that left women and other kind of people outside of the structure of power. So that is that is the thing I entertain myself.
Wow. Well, I mean, thank you so much, Walter, for so much.
The other thing you can do, I mean, I have been doing it, but you can do workshop outside of the university, kind of work on it. But you can publish op-eds. I published 3 op-eds in the last 2 months. One, in fact, back in the Rosa, which is a newspaper in Argentina, one in Palabra Salvaje, that is in the wire, and appears once a month. The Goldsmith University publication, I published another there. So that kind of creates a lot of kind of interaction with other people, a lot of kind of camaraderie and a coalition, as Maria Lugones used to call. So that's one of the things we can do. We cannot convince Biden and Putin and say, come on, guys, that's, you know, you should have a kind of agreement. Okay.
No, thank you so much. Okay, I think we should wrap up here. We don't really. 2 people made it with us all the way, which is great. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to everyone for being here, and especially to Walter for a really incredible time.